All right, in this video I hope to demonstrate how to install camshaft bearings in a 1977 MGB 4-cylinder 1800cc 18V type engine. So these are what the bearings look like. You can see they do have holes in them. These holes need to match up with the mating holes that are in the block. In a previous video I talked about, there's a hole down in there. On the back one, you can see that's going to match up with one of the holes here. And so what I'm going to do here is I've gone to the hardware store and I got myself a long piece of all thread and a couple of nuts on it and a couple of washers. These washers are going to slide, and these washers that I bought are going to push on the ends of these bearings as they go into the slots. Now these washers right here, they're kind of thick. They are roughly 2 inches. You can see right there, 2 inches. And that 2 inches, if you're looking at it on the caliper, here's 2 inches right here, is just bigger than the bearing. And these bearings, they reduce in size as you go from the timing chain side, which is the front of the engine, all the way back to the main bearing at the back. You see this one gets a little bit smaller, and this one gets a little smaller still, right? So these washers right here, I kind of bought these specifically so that you can see there's where the center bearing will go. Whoops, I don't think you can really get any light. Here we go. There's the center bearing right there. And you can see these washers, they fit just right over those holes. I'm kind of slanting so it doesn't fall over, but here, that's a little bit better. You can see that they just barely fit over those holes, so there won't be a lot of slack and they'll be able to slide in there. So the concept here is, and I'll just kind of demonstrate with my hand here, that you put a bearing in on one side, and then you hold this part with a wrench, and then you tighten it up, and what's going to happen is this whole screw section is going to move forward, and it will reduce the space between these two washers, and that will force the bearing into its slot. So that's the plan. Well, one of the things I'm going to do on this also before I during the prep here is I'm going to put some, see I got some masking tape here. I'm going to put some masking tape in on this inside surface because I don't want that to get damaged in any way by any of these threads as I'm moving it back and forth. But I will mark all these holes to make sure in the tape that I know that it'll match up with the holes in the engine block. So let me go ahead and set one of these up, and I'll do a video of it being pushed in. One other quick note: before you put these bearings in, make sure to inspect the surface of this bore that's going to accept the bearings. Make sure that there's no spall, there's no rust or anything in there that would deform the bearing or reduce the diameter when you put that in there. And inspection's everything, so just make sure that it's clean and ready to accept the bearings. The reason why I mention that is on inspection myself, I noticed what looks like a little nick right here. I don't know if you can see. I'll get a battery in there. See, there we go. A little flashlight action. You can see that little nick on the. Let me zoom in. See that little nick? Initially, I thought maybe that was from when they machined the engine block. They took the bearings out. I thought maybe that was a scratch or a burr or something. But on closer inspection, it looks more like it's a casting error, and it doesn't have a burr. So I'm not really too concerned with that. It doesn't go that far. But inspect. Make sure that you have good mating surfaces because you don't want to damage it and you don't want to distort it. You want it to be true and round when you put those bearings in. This first bearing, which is the one at the very back of goes in the very back of the engine here. You see those holes are offset, but they're offset symmetrically. So if you put it in this way or if you put it in this way, there's really no difference. The one at the top is always going to be further to the right, and the one at the bottom is always going to be further to the left. So I don't think it really matters which direction you put it in. So just, if you're looking at that and you're like, which way do I go? That's my observation anyway. Maybe my marks might be a little bit off, but I'll straighten that out. Anyway, on to pressing them. There you go. Got the rear one all tightened in there. What I ended up doing was, see, this is the back side where it's connected. What I ended up doing was, tightening it up by hand, and then just tapping it lightly on the end of the all thread there with a hammer, and it went right in there. Just tap, 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 tighten a little bit by hand, and then tap, tap, tap. And everything's happy. So let's take these bolts off and have a look at see what the result was. All right, I can say that I'm actually pretty pleased with that. You can see the hole down there is lining up okay. Whoops. I don't know if you can better view from over here. That one's at kind of a slant, but you can see this one here lines up just right. So I won't have to worry about those oil passages being blocked. The other one down here, you can see it, so it goes through. So that's one down, two to go. Rinse and repeat. Let's go on to this next one. Okay, so the one in the middle here, the holes are oriented kind of like this, but you can see on the bearing, there's a hole here and a hole here, right? And so if you're looking at the way that that's oriented, this is the slot where the bearing is connected. This is going to actually kind of do like that when you put it in place. So anyway, when you want to orient these holes, you want to pick one and then have the other one kind of fall into place. So this bottom one right here, we're going to call this one the bottom. And I'm going to line that up on this hole right there. So the other hole is, I have a little marker. It kind of goes up into that main bearing right up in there, but it's on the side. I don't know if you can see that mark or not. It's across the bottom and inward. So you want to line up the bottom and then have this hole for the inward side. So let's go ahead and get this one cranked in. All right, so now that I've got it in place, the bearing has started into its seat. But before I crank it all the way down, I just pulled out the pressing rig so that I could verify my bearing placement with the holes. And so that's what I'm doing right here. I just wanted to share it with y'all. It looks like I'm straight and true, so I'm going to go ahead and crank it all the way through. All right, so one of the downfalls of using these slotted bearing sets is if the slot gets a little distorted when you're installing the bearing, the metal will distort a little bit and go out around. And that's what I'm seeing here on this, the middle inside bearing. just having some resistance and it's really not fitting that well. And you can see there's, after putting the cam in and testing it, there's kind of a shiny spot there. So I'm going to have to make some minor adjustments with some very fine grit sandpaper and put that back into round. So, you know, to do this, if I could have this over again, I'd probably buy the Durabond solid bearings instead of the slotted ones. But this is what was available in stock. So anyway, just FYI, if you have that problem, you may need to dress it up a little bit at the end. All right, so I don't want anybody to ever call BS on one of my videos. I'm not going to candy coat anything for you. This is not an easy task, putting these bearings in. Sure, the little all-thread bearing tool that I made with a bar of all thread, that worked out really well. But this is actually not going that well. So you can see this outside bearing. This is the front one here. It has some wear. I want to say wear. It has some shiny spots. And so what I'm running into is I'm able to get the cam in there, but it's really tight. It's not nearly as loose as I would like to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this video into, hey, troubleshooting. Let's say you put new bearings in and they don't work. So that's what we're going to go through. So when you get a brand new bearing, it has a machined look to the bearing surface. It has lines in it that go concentric with the circle here. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to manage these bearings. I'm just going to take a little bit of material off using some 600 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to look for these high spots, right? And I can see them really well on the outside here. And I'm going to walk you through some diagnostics so you can determine which bearing it is. Once you get the whole shaft in there, it's hard to determine which bearing it is that's running slow. So, or which one's binding, right? So the first thing that you can look at is, these shiny spots. These are the areas where the bearing is touching with a bit more force, and it's causing the zinc coating on these bearings to become shiny. And so, first thing you can do is you can look at that, and you can see here on the outside bearing, there's some topical little tiny ones. It's not a big deal. On the center bearing, you can see there's one right here. It's kind of bad. I've been kind of working on this one to see if I can get it down, just little bits at a time, and you don't ever want to take too much off. And so I'm going back and forth and just sanding them down, and then cleaning it off, and going back and retesting. You can see it does make a little improvements. And then on the back one back here, you can see I've got some high spots in here as well. See where there's a shiny spot right there, just past that hole. It looks as though the block itself may have deformed the bearing and put it out around in that little area. So there's a little bump right there. And so I'm going to work on getting rid of those little marks. I don't know if I'm getting out of focus here. Not a lot of shiny spots on the top here. Primarily that one right there. So the other thing that you can do to determine which bearing it is that's giving you grief is you put the cam in one bearing at a time. So normally you put the cam in so that the small bearing goes in, you go all the way to the end, but in this case I want to eliminate each individual bearing. So I'm going to test this bearing surface by putting it in backwards. And I'm going to test this first bearing. You know what? That is actually a really good fit. It moves without any kind of grief, a little bit of chatter, but it's really nice. I don't think that that's a problem. So I'm gonna say that this bearing surface is good. This one's good. I don't think that that's anything that would cause it to bind. So I'm gonna do the same thing from the other side, and you can see I've moved the engine mount off center so that I can gain access to this directly from this direction. So I'm going to put the cam in right in here. Let's see if we can get this in. we'll test this side of the bearing surfaces. I think that maybe that gear is still a little bit off. Okay, so there we go. We got it adjusted so that I can get this in there. So anyway, you can test this end by putting the bearing or the camshaft in backwards and test the back side. You can see that's a nice fit. That side fits just right. All right, so that tells me that the front bearing and the back bearing are good, and so the only thing that I have to worry about is dealing with the center bearing. And so once that one is good to go, then I'll be able to install everything and we'll be good to go. So taking the cam in and out a lot, you start to realize that there's some interesting things about the geometry of these bearings. First of all, this front bearing is way thicker than the center bearing, which is significantly thicker than the end bearing. And I think the reason why they do that is, you know, when you're installing the camshaft, if all the bearings were the same thickness, they would all engage their bearing casings at the same time. And in this case, you can see I'm still engaged in the middle one when this end one comes out. See right there? I'm out of the middle one, and I'm still in this one right here. And so it makes it a little easier for you when you're pulling it in and out, so that you don't you know, bang the bearings up too much. Obviously, it's really difficult to move this thing inside and out, and you're basically playing a game of operation. You know, take out the wrenched ankle. But all this time, while you're messing with that, this first bearing is still very well engaged, and that's why this one's so much thicker. So it just makes it easier for you to pull it in and out without doing any damage. Quick little thing, observation that I found. Another little quick trick. It's a little easier to handle the cam with if you just put the gear on. You put the timing gear on there, then it gives you a little more to hang on to. Once you get past the end, you got nothing to hold on to, and you don't have any leverage. But if you have the timing gear on there, it gives you just a little more leverage so that you can work. All right, so once you're good with the dry fit, once you know that you're confident that it's gonna spin well unencumbered, and that all of your bearings are doing what they're supposed to be doing, go ahead and pull that thing out, and let's get some assembly oil in there. All right, all slathered up. Got the assembly oil in there. This thing is turning like a clock. No resistance. It's sliding back and forth. It runs really nice. So there you go. That is the installation of a camshaft. Again, this is with the split type bearings. You know, given this to do over again, I gotta reiterate, I would have gone with the DuraPro solid bearings. They're a little more expensive. They're harder to come by, but the reason why they're always out of stock is because they're better. They're easier to install. They handle a lot better. It turned out what the problem was on this middle bearing was, I don't know if you can see now that it's installed, the joint, which is right up here on the top, where it comes together, it got a little deflection or something. It didn't come back together quite cleanly, and it just took a little while to you know, adjust that surface to the point where it didn't have any resistance. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this timing chain sprocket and put the fastener on there to make that installation complete. There you go. This is a installation of a camshaft and split bearings on a 1977 MGB with an 18V type engine.